Hey loves. So here I am. I am actually back home off the road for the moment. Feels good. And we've just entered the third week of the school. So this first month of homecoming is where we basically build this foundational architecture. We start with dominion, just basically arriving, magnetism, grounding, being here, that sense of personal potency and just belonging to the moment. We move then into poise and periphery the second week, where we're working more with, all right, do you have room to breathe around you? Is there a central pillar through you that is holding that for you, right? That we look at this relationship between the central pillar, your center, and the periphery then that is created around that, the space, and the way that that puts everything into right relationship to you. Now here we are in coming into the third week here with Guardian, which has everything to do with boundaries. And I wanted to share a teaching from this week with you that I feel like it's been huge for me. And because boundaries are such an issue for so many of us and such a complicated issue, I wanted to share it with you and just give a little bit of that too and see how it feels. And just so you know, this is the first time that the cat, I've been back for almost 2 days now, this is the first time that the cat has approached me. The minute the minute I tune into you guys, she likes to be here. It's significant. She's a good girl. But this thing about boundaries. So lots of things about boundaries, and this is actually one of the longer teachings in the school. But the piece I wanted to bring forward, that is the title of this video, is that healthy boundaries will keep you in before they keep anything else out. And this has to do with, I want to deliver this in a good way. We really get into it in the school, but it's something that, I feel like you can just taste and take into your own world. If you start to think of boundaries, just like, okay, look, it's the container around you, it's the periphery, it's the, they're guardians at the gate, it's the gate, it's before anything can get towards you, right? If you start to consider that one of the functions, possibly the primary function of boundaries, is to keep you in rather than to keep others out, it can shift both your relationship to boundaries and your relationship to whether or not boundaries are actually a potentizing thing for you or an isolating and ultimately, maybe you can have that feeling. You have that feeling of when you're setting boundaries, but you're setting them because you feel weak, because you feel like they're rigid. You're not sure they're going to be respected. You're not even sure that you can have them, but you do it anyway. And maybe you're kind of a little extra aggressive about it. Or, we know when we're setting a boundary, speaking a truth, laying a line, clarifying something. And we know the difference between when we're doing that and it's just clear, it's just easy, simple. We know that this is just what is. Of course, there's the line. This is what is okay, this is what is not okay. We know the difference between the simplicity of that and the fullness of that versus when we're kind of speaking a truth or setting a boundary or what, and we're not actually sure. Somewhere inside, we don't actually 100% have ourselves. We're maybe not sure that we can. We're not sure that we're going to be respected in that place. We're not actually maybe totally sure that that's our truth or that's the actual boundary we want to set. There might be inner conflict there. And for me, what has been so helpful with that is to see boundaries as something whose job, first of kind of predominantly actually over time, is to keep me in. And what that means for me is that when I set a boundary, when I say, hey, that's not good for me, or I'm not going to do that, or I'm going to walk away from that, or hey, that's where you stop, right? There's a very different feeling to it if I do that in order to preserve my own power, in order to potentize my being, to keep myself in, because I know that that is going to disperse me, that is going to poison me, that is going to weaken me, that is going to confuse me, right? That doesn't feel good. Where there's the choice isn't, it's, you know, the boundary is the same. What I will say is it's the same, you know, you're still protecting yourself, setting clear lines between you and what's okay and what's not okay, you know. The difference is that when you create a boundary, or when, I'll just say, when I create a boundary from a place of keeping my fullness in, it's so much more inarguable, you know, because it's not, it ultimately, in even my own awareness, sure, I might feel like that thing is toxic, I might feel like that person isn't good for me, I feel like that's not a good choice for me, but the boundary isn't based on the other thing. The boundary isn't based on whether or not that person is a toxic person, whether or not that person is this or that kind of person, whether or not the situation is what I think it is or isn't. There's a level of simplicity when I just allow myself to say and feel like, hey, for me, that would be toxic. For me, that's not a good relationship. For me, that's not a choice I'm willing to make anymore. That's not a relationship I'm willing to lean into anymore. Whatever that is. What that does is it changes it for me, because my awareness then becomes about keeping my, like, cultivating potency, simply. So rather than fighting, rather than feeling like, you know, rather than needing to put up all these walls or even understand everything that's outside of me, all I have to do is know myself well enough to know what is and what is not for me. It becomes more simple, right? And it ultimately is a way of creating boundaries that don't further entangle you in things that you don't want to be entangled in, right? So say there's somebody who feels, go ahead and say toxic to you, whatever that word is, but if you let yourself be in a place of just saying, like, you know what, for me, who I am with my vulnerabilities, my sensitivities, my needs, my desires, that's just not right for me. And that's where it ends, rather than moving into, because, and starting to peer into somebody else's psychology, starting to peer into somebody else's motivations, and starting to peer into, you know, all the things that you think or you've seen or you perceive, or, you know, kind of leaving yourself to kind of move into this person's reality. First of all, be guaranteed you won't ever see anything 100% accurately. And you can also be pretty guaranteed that what that's going to do is entangle you further in that relationship, in that exchange. You are leaving your own boundaries. I mean, if your boundaries are meant to keep you in, what that means is that the more of you have, the more of your own presence, the more of your focus, the more of just your own mind, your own energy, the more of you have, the more you're going to actually know what is right for you and what is not. And the more potent you'll be as a being, just the more substance you're going to have here, because you're not everywhere. You're not out here trying to figure out this person or this social movement or, you know, this situation or this piece of your history. You know, you're not in all these places trying to set your boundaries based on other people, other things, and your perceptions of them. It's not that you know, of course our perceptions are important. It's hugely important that we have our discernment. But when I'm talking from this perspective, it has to do with how can you set boundaries that do actually set you free, that do actually work, you know? You set a boundary, or you make a decision to create a line in your life, to speak a truth. You can do that in a way that sets you free, to be more of yourself, to follow what is right for you rather than that thing that is not right for you, or you can do it in a way that actually further and further entangles you into the thing that isn't for you in the first place. When you consider, and just, you know, it's hard for me to know because I don't know what boundaries you're looking at, and I don't, you know, we all have very different relationships with even that word. But if you feel into something in your life where you know you need to set a boundary, or you're trying to set a boundary and it's not working, or the boundaries that you're setting, the truth that you're speaking is fracturing, is kind of breaking apart relationships rather than just transitioning them, right? You know, there is a way to transition relationships to be in right relationship to you in a way that doesn't fracture them, particularly familial relationships, particularly complex relationships where there is both love and there's also trouble, right? So when you think about keeping your energy in, your boundaries, keeping your energy in, what I would offer there is just remember that the more potent you are, the more this here, this space around you, your personal sphere, your God-given birthright, I'm right here, space, the more that's full of you, the more that alone will set things to rights. You know, there's our world, people respond to what is, not always what we're saying. They respond, that's just kind of the way it works. If we have inner conflict, like if I love someone and I kind of hate them at the same time, or I love them and I fear them at the same time, I want to be close and I want to be far away, whatever comes out of my mouth, whatever I'm saying, if it's not consistent with what I am, what I'm expressing, it's going to be a little confusing, right? And it's not going to arrive the way that it needs to actually set a clear line, right? We just worked with this in the equinox ceremony, this sacred need for congruency, that when we have ourselves, when we step away from kind of over-involvement and hyper-vigilant, just kind of the hypervigilance and the deep dives into everything outside of us, when we do step away from that and just come here, feel here, listen here, be present here, and start to orient from the center and the center outward rather than in reaction or response to all the things that are coming in from the outside. When we do that, all of a sudden, we become congruent. You know, we're able to hear the inner conflict that we have and then reconcile it. You know, we're able to bring ourselves, because we have enough energy, we have enough presence, we are inside of our own world, we're inside of our own beings. And when we do that, all of a sudden we have the energy and the wherewithal and the vision and the clarity to make ourselves true. And that is what then makes boundaries, makes our truth have a congruent substance behind it. That's not only trustworthy, but is also very audible and very inarguable. You know, one of the things we work with, you know, around Guardian this week of the school is just this way of being inarguable. That if you are, there's a profoundly inarguable truth to the statement of, hey, I can't do that anymore. I don't have the, you know what, I don't have the clarity to do that anymore. That's too much for me. That would be the wrong thing for me. I'm not available for that, you know, for me, for that, right? When you are saying that, there's something inarguable. Sure, anybody can argue with you about anything, but there's something so much more inarguable about that because you're just stating the truth. You know, hey, you know what? I'm not going to do that right now. That's not good for me. Rather than kind of setting the same line, creating the same boundary by saying, hey, you are such a toxic person. You know, you never hear me, so XYZ, you know. Very different to say, you know what, I don't feel heard here. I think I'm going to pull back. You know, these are subtle differences, but in a world that's very inflamed and where not only is there this kind of these huge movements in the collective way of being that are very confrontational, you know, polarizing, oppositional, a lot of fracture happening, a lot of a lot of labeling of other, you know. In a world where that's happening, that is going to intensify that inside of ourselves, and it's going to, you know, and I'm watching it have a lot of impact on people's intimate relationships, on their relationships to themselves. You know, things are breaking apart. We don't want that. It's not really, it's not the only way, and it's really not the best way. We have something else, which is just to continue to come closer and closer to our own internal alignment and integrity and congruency, and to just keep offering that to the world and keep letting the world find its way around that. You know, very different than enforcing what you want and you need and you see, and putting everything in its place and in the way that you want. You know, when you just say, look, how about I'm just going to keep myself in here. I'm going to take responsibility for not dispersing my energy. I'm going to take responsibility for not dispersing my mind, for not allowing a lot of poison into my mind. I'm going to take responsibility for being silent at times. I'm going to take responsibility for cultivating my own intimacy with what's here, with what I do feel, what's true. And then I'm just going to let everything else actually start to respond to that. I'm going to let this set all that to rights to whatever extent it does. And what's amazing about it, and which I'm in a pretty significant experience of right now, is that it does actually happen. It's a trip, because I just spent like 2 months fully pulling myself out of my world and my life and everything. And I come back and things are aligning themselves. I spent 2 months really reckoning with myself, really pulling myself in, right? I was out. I was not doing well in terms of holding my own values in the face of all the things that are going on. And it's fascinating to watch that it's right. It's true. It's true. This is when I talk about deep feminine influence rather than control. Influence towards the good rather than control over in order to make the good. This is what I'm talking about. And that our dominion over our own beingness, our personal dominion, is where we have the right, sacred right. We do not have sacred right over others. We don't have, it is not actually okay for us to peer into the psychology, the motivations, all the things of all these other people in order to know who we are. It's great to name what you see, important. It's very important to name and identify cognitive dissonance and coercion and manipulation, and to be able to feel those things and to know what they are, so that you don't give way to them and so that you don't internalize them. But get the message and hang up the phone, right? We get the message. That is not congruent. That doesn't make any sense. What that person is saying and what they're doing are completely different things, you know? This isn't good for me. Every time I do this, I'm more confused than I was before. Every time I engage with this, it costs more than it gives, right? We get the message, but then you just hang up the phone. Don't stay there. It's not then your job to continue outside of yourself. Your job in this model is to say, oh, okay, that's the message. I got it once. I don't need it a million other times. And the message is, come home. The message is, that's not good for me, and I need to understand how I make my choices. Hope this is making sense. I feel like, you know, sometimes it's a little difficult to like give this full, you know, it's a much fuller transmission in the school. It's, you know, we're working with practices around it, and I can only give so much, but I did want to just give you this consideration that your boundaries are almost primarily, just consider that for a minute, see how it feels. Your boundaries are here to keep you in, not necessarily just to keep others out. And they really only work well if they have the purpose to keep you in. If you have a boundary that's only set up to keep everything else out, but it's not coming from the place of keeping you in, then there's not going to be anything of you behind that boundary. You're not going to have the substance of yourself. You're not going to have the congruency. What you're going to have are rigid, opinionated, kind of unconvinced, energetically unconvinced boundaries, an energetically unsupported truth, because it doesn't actually go all the way through you, and you're not behind it, right? So what I'm hoping that this could give a little strength to is your ease, and that there's a luxury in boundaries, that it's not a war. We don't have to keep playing according to the rules of war culture, just because that's the big inheritance that we got. When you think about your boundaries keeping you in, there is a luxury in that. There is an ease in that. And like I said, if you really can feel it, there is an inarguable sacred right in that, right? And you fill up and you fill up and you fill up, and you'll see that starts to set things to rights. The more you become coherent, the more that you do make choices to keep yourself close. Keep your energy here with you. Keep your mind close to you and keep it clean, right? Keep your heart close to you. Be aware of who you open it to. Take the time to cultivate. Take the time to feel what you are. That makes it so much more audible to creation at large, especially to people. Because a lot of times people may not want to hear who you are. It's not like everybody's so interested in your boundaries, so they may or may not be happy about them. However, if you're audible, and if you're coherent and you're congruent behind them, and you're not fighting, and you're not asking somebody else to admit or accept your projection of them, all you're doing is stating what you're available for and what you're not. It's going to be clean, and you are actually going to be set free rather than entangled. You want to walk away from setting a boundary. You want to walk away from reorganizing a relationship, feeling like there's more of you, that your mind, your thoughts, your energy, your emotions are with you now. They're not being pushed and pulled by this other thing. They're not being manipulated by this other thing, right? I hope there's some relevance in there for you. I hope it serves. And I will look forward to having some time with you later. Maybe next week. The school is technically closed. Enrollment is technically closed, but I was supposed to put out a little note about that, and I didn't get to it. So if you did want to join, I would be open to you joining until the end of this weekend, which is Sunday, roughly. Today's like the 22nd, and it's a Wednesday. So just so you know. And otherwise, I really do. I hope this helps to free you and to let this thing of making choices and discerning and saying yes and saying no, let this journey that we're all going to be on pretty much every day, every moment for the rest of our lives, this journey of discernment and getting closer and closer to our own truths, I would wish that could become more and more of if not easy, more of a filling, substantiating, liberating experience than one of fracture and contention and ongoing confusion, and that it be an invitation into intimacy with your truth rather than an invitation into a lot of ideas about who everybody else is. We'll never know. Nobody wears a sign, and there's mystery in all people and all things. So, love you. Thanks for having a little time with me, and I'll talk to you later.